Dun, 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 dun. We are live. Welcome to week 13. This used to be the penultimate week, the week before the playoffs, the week when everybody's life or death was decided in their league, maybe still in a few leagues, but either way, it's going to play a big role in which teams go on to the playoffs and playoff seeding and all kinds of other good things. So let's jump right in with Dr. Jene Bramel, who does the incredible, impossible task for us every week of tracking all these injuries. Gene, let's start with Gerald Henderson because we have the classic competing national insiders, and we have to pick who we actually believe.
Let's believe Schefter. How about that? That's simple enough.
I'm sold.
Now, I think, we talked a little bit about this on Thursday night, being that Sean McVay seemed to be pretty optimistic all the way through before Thursday's practice, and then to not see Henderson on the practice field on Thursday was an immediate red flag that whatever optimism was there is no longer there. So, and then we're seeing Friday, the best he could do would get out a little bit and a little bit of more of a practice evaluation than anything else. And then there wasn't a lot of optimism through the weekend. I think, when you hear that players are 50-50, the national media has to sort of take a stand on things. And Rappaport was on the side of hopeful, and Schefter is on the side of not optimistic. And I think, when a player has to be looked at during pregame, that tells you that the team really isn't ready for them to play. They're not expecting them to play. Sean McVay on Wednesday and Thursday was already saying that Sony Michel was likely to be pulled off special teams duty because they as we go there. So I think that's probably where we're going to be. I'll be surprised if Henderson's active. Hopefully he recovers quickly enough to be back next week and beyond, but prepare for him to be inactive, and I think it's going to be all Sony Michel. If Henderson is somehow active, he is not going to be a player that gets 15 to 20 touches today at all. Michel's still going to be in the mix. So I know the question is going to be how much Sony Michel is there likely to be, and I think it's likely to be all of it because I don't see Henderson as active.
So the big one that I've got that came from last night's news, Gene, is this whole Jalen Hurts thing. I can't make sense of it at all because it sounded like throughout the week he was going to play. He definitively states he's going to play. What was that, like Wednesday, Thursday? I think when we talked on Thursday night, he said by that time it said he was going to play. And then we get one of the beat reporters saying he's not going to play. I even saw a tweet indicating that he couldn't even get through the stretching portion of practice on Friday. And now that he's supposed to be out today, Gardner Minshew starting. I mean, can you walk us through just this whole, I guess, scenario of what's gone on from Monday, Tuesday to what you expect to see with Hurts or Minshew today on the field for the Eagles?
Yeah, and I think it's going to be Hurts. I think Derek Gunn was way too confident in his report yesterday. Adam Schefter tried to walk it back a little bit and say, well, they want to see him in pregame warmups. But this has sort of been the tone through the weekend that Hurts wasn't going to be ready to go. And this is part sprain and part where he got stepped on, and he got stepped on the inside of his ankle there a little bit. And that is the primary weight bearing bone. If he's got a little bit of a bruise in that area, maybe a little bit more of some soft tissue damage than just a sprain, then it could be hard for him to get around and weight bear a little bit. But this might have just as much to do with the fact that if Hurts is not going to be capable to move outside the pocket and threaten defenses with his legs, he has not been all that effective and consistent as a pocket passer. If he's going to be limited in the pocket and he's coming off a 4-interception game, many of which were his own personal struggles, then you can see the Eagles saying, I think we're going to give you a little bit more time to go. And Hurts may say he's ready to play and probably was close. But if they trust Minshew more in the pocket, I think that probably has as much to do with what's going on today as the injury.
I'm back. It's New Orleans, everybody. Gene, another one where we have to pick between reports of our national insiders about DeAndre Hopkins. One side looks like, hey, start him as usual. The other side, maybe not usual business for DeAndre Hopkins today in Chicago.
Yeah, I was nervous reading through Friday afternoon to Saturday morning because the Cardinals have been consistently saying that they're not going to put Hopkins back on the field until he's ready. And, Hopkins toward the end of the week didn't practice on Friday. Why would they do that? You would think that the more football related conditioning he gets and the closer he gets to, getting some timing down and running routes and seeing passes and so on and so forth would be an important final step in his recovery. And then Hopkins himself said, I just want to see how I feel on Sunday before I commit to going. It's a little bit unusual for a typically confident player. And then the beat writers referenced a conversation between Kingsbury and Hopkins in which Kingsbury stressed how important Hopkins was to the offense to Hopkins himself, saying, look, you went back on the field as a decoy on that Thursday night game and the whole defense changed. We need you healthy for the playoff run, the end of the season to push for a bye, the playoffs themselves, if we're going to be a successful team. And all that started to add up to me as maybe he's not ready. Maybe they want to give him an extra week. It is Chicago. Again, you don't want to take any one of these 17 regular season games for granted necessarily, but if the priority is to have him healthy for those last couple of weeks, should you need to make the number one overall seed and a playoff bye push and set yourself up for as much as you could, then maybe he wasn't going to do as much today. And then it was odd overnight when we're hearing, well, due to his injury and the game field conditions with the weather, he may see limited snaps. Just didn't sound reassuring to me. But Cliff Kingsbury is probably as reportedly already confirmed that both Kyler Murray and Hopkins are going to play today. You wouldn't think that they would put him on the field even if they were planning on limited snaps for conditioning purposes, if they weren't going to use him. He's not going to be a decoy. So I don't know that you're going to see 60 to 70 snaps and 35 to 50 routes run necessarily from Hopkins. But when he's on the field, I think they're going to be looking his way. I don't know that we're going to get a ceiling expectation today, but if he is active, I think you can assume reasonably that they're going to use him.
So, Gene, with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, this stomach bug or whatever he's got going on, I remember seeing a tweet from Ian Hartitz over at PFF saying that this exact same thing happened to him at this exact same point last season against Denver, no less as well. And we wound up seeing very limited output from CEH. I mean, with at least what we know right now, can we expect something similar to what we saw last year? If you've got him, you probably in a spot where you have to start him. Where are you at with CEH?
I think you can reasonably put him in your lineup. This isn't a Boston Scott situation where he missed all week of practice or a Lamar Jackson situation where we know that he was up and down throughout the week and trending poorly. He was practicing until Friday, didn't go on Friday, and then there were reports, I think it was Ian Rappaport, that said that he was back available for the walkthrough on Saturday. So hopefully that means it was a relatively short-lived illness. Conditioning won't be significantly affected. He's back hydrated without too much difficulty, and I think that's what we're likely to see. And there wasn't any indication overnight that there was anything different. So all of these illnesses, take a different path from player to player. But from what I've seen, he's reassuring enough that I think you can expect him to get the bulk of the carries today.
This is a theme, Gene, which again highlights how impossible and incredible your task is with differing reports. This time it's James Robinson. One report would make you think there's no way I'm playing him even if he's active. Another one, well, if he's active, maybe what we've been seeing from him the last few weeks, which hasn't been terrible.
Yeah, Robinson is tough. Since he came back from the injury, he's not been getting nearly as many snaps as he had previously. He's kind of in that 55 to 65% of the offensive snaps range. And Carlos Hyde really hasn't been solid enough for him to be forcing that in the same way that maybe a Tony Pollard or an AJ Dillon or some, other committee situation like that with a solid player ahead of him is just too good to keep off the field, so to speak. That's really not been the case with Carlos Hyde. But in those limited snaps, Robinson has been as productive as he had been prior to that. He's putting touchdowns on the board. Last week, I think he had 17 carries and a nice yards per carry average. Looked good doing so. They're still using him in the passing game. But there was, Thursday was a little bit odd. Thursday's practice, all the beat writers were saying, we don't see James Robinson. We don't see James Robinson. And then he was listed as limited because he did come out on the field and do a little bit of drills. So those two, 3 weeks of a trend where there's a little bit more of a concern, and then he's doing less in practice than he was already doing through the week, raises concern a little bit. So it wasn't too surprising anyway, to read overnight that the Jaguars really weren't planning on using him this week. That was probably meaningful what the beat writers were looking at and trying to hint at on Thursday. But Robinson, being who he is, trying to play through this injury as much as he has and still been effective doing so, apparently told everybody that he felt a little bit better on Saturday and is now trending towards playing. So the difficulty here is going to be, I think you're going to see something in that 50 to 60% range with him today. If he doesn't feel as good as he has, they're more likely to pull him. Urban Meyer last week said, I didn't even know. I didn't understand why he wasn't on the field for those critical red zone snaps in the second half of last week's game. So, if Robinson or his position coaches don't feel like he's ready to go, he's come off the field already. So he needs to be healthy enough to get through this game. Urban Meyer and the offensive staff hasn't been shy about using Carlos Hyde when possible. So it's just hard to know. This could be a week where he gets 10 to 12 touches instead of the 15 to 18. It is still productive, or it could be a week where the first couple of series don't go well and we see all of Carlos Hyde. So I'll let you guys kind of talk through the landscape of the running back position and see how you feel like he best fits. But yes, I am nervous that although he's been productive in those limited touches and the decreased usage, that this week might be a little bit different in that the team had already been planning to do something different with their players.
So, Gene, DeSean Jackson, I know he missed practice earlier in the week with the calf injury, came back after having the birthday celebration with Marshawn Lynch, which I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall during that type of situation. But either way, I mean, with him being one of the older wide receivers in the league and also the way he's used on the field, should we at least think about the possible chance of re-aggravation while he's out on the field today?
Yeah, I think so. I was reassured by the fact that he was back on Friday and he was cleared to talk to the media. It doesn't sound like a major situation, but any leg soft tissue situation for a receiver whose primary job is to stretch the field puts them at risk of aggravation, puts them at risk of limited success. They just may not be able to get the separation they have before. So I think if you're using DeSean Jackson, you're hoping for a couple of downfield passes. You're not looking for a high target game, and this is something that could cause some concern. So I don't. It's hard to gauge the risk of aggravation because we're not exactly sure what Thursday's DNP meant. But I think if I probably would put that to the side and be a little bit more worried about, you've got a boom bust play that might have a little bit of risk.
I'm trying to think. I feel like we've touched on most of the major ones, Gene.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to think about Boston Scott today. We really didn't speak about him specifically. One of my concerns yesterday was a player whose status was still up in the air on Friday after not practicing all week is usually a player that you wouldn't expect to see on the field. But Miles Sanders, although he did come back from that ankle injury that limited him last week to a couple of full practices and is not on the injury report altogether, Jordan Howard is not going to go. Kenneth Gainwell really hasn't been trusted with many snaps at all. And then you're looking at Jason Huntley coming up from the practice squad. So I don't know that I'd be super reassured that Boston Scott is quote unquote expected to play and is active. This could be a situation where active, yes, getting any touches, no. So I feel pretty good about the fact that Miles Sanders has had a couple of full practices. I think you're going to see him see the vast majority of carries today. A little bit nervous about Boston Scott being healthy. The only other thing I think we ought to be keeping an eye on injury-wise is what's going on with Alex Collins. So we kind of hinted last week that dealing with groin issues and then abdomen issues limited for weeks and weeks and weeks now. Just flashing red light should be going off that this is a core muscle injury that he's got, and we're seeing some of their other players get healthy. If they knew that Rashad Penny and Travis Homer were going to fully practice and DJ Dallas is already healthy, why are we signing Adrian Peterson? Right. So it just makes me nervous that although there wasn't a lot of talk, the tone of the reports around Alex Collins this week seemed to be a little bit more pessimistic, including from Pete Carroll himself. So either this is going to a New England's Patriot situation where 4 or 5 players could get 15 to 25% of the snaps and you have no idea who, or Alex Collins is on the verge of being inactive soon. And maybe we're going to see some change in that rushing attack going forward. And I don't know who that's going to be necessarily, just to put a little bit of bug in everybody's mind there, that I don't know that Alex Collins is long for the rest of the season.
I think the last one I've got real quick is just long-term outlook for a few guys since we're getting close to the fantasy playoffs. Darren Waller, I thought we talked about him a bit on Thursday night, but what about Kadarius Toney and Sterling Shepard? I mean, these oblique or soft tissue injuries. Sterling Shepard's been out for a month now, if not a little bit more. So between those 3 guys, are you confident any of them will be back for us for the fantasy playoffs?
The tone of the beat writers this week suggested that Shepard was pretty close, and to the point where it was a little bit surprising for him to be listed doubtful on Friday, which makes me nervous for a couple of different reasons. Maybe he just wasn't ready to go, but you wonder if there was a little bit of an aggravation or a setback later this week. And initially it was a hamstring, and now it's a quad. And you wonder, is it the same leg? Is there sort of a push-pull situation with those muscles where neither one of them can really get healthy. I think we've got a couple of weeks before you're looking to have Shepard for the fantasy playoffs, thankfully. So I think he's a little bit closer than Tony. Both of those guys should be playing before the end of the year. Neither one of them are going on injured reserve. It doesn't look like, and I don't think this is going to turn into what we thought was 1 to 2 weeks becomes 4 to 6, unless we hear that there was a little bit of an aggravation with Shepard this week. So I wouldn't feel confident about them next week either, but hopefully weeks 15, 16, 17, at least one of them, if not both, are back and ready to go.
Jene is always back and always ready to go for a wonderful service you provide, guiding us through the murkier and murkier waters. We can't even count on Ian Rappaport and Adam Schefter to agree anymore, but we can always count on Dr. Jene to give us good recommendations. And we'll see you Thursday night, and we will see you Tuesday on the Waiver Wire Show, even though we won't be able to try to make you crack
some version of my face. Yeah, the Rappaport, Pelissero, Schefter is another discussion maybe we should have on a Thursday night, because I think there are some interesting things happening there that are kind of subtle that may not be getting picked up on. So
are they unflappable, Gene?
Skeptical about whether or not I can say unflappable.
That's going to end up on a t-shirt.
It should. Yeah.
Good luck, everybody.
Yeah, we need it. Woo. Lots of questions. I've been going through and trying to answer as many as I can while Dr. Jene has been giving us the wisdom. But we're going to get into some specific ones. But I want to touch on a few players I think that have thrown a monkey wrench, or maybe not a monkey wrench, because monkey wrench implies bad. What would be, I'm trying to think of a good metaphor for a good monkey wrench, Javonte Williams. Is it just as simple as because here's the thing, what's really wild, Chris, is I was looking at rankings this week. I have to come up with sleepers, some buy low highs and things like that. Dare I say running back is more robust than wide receiver right now. There's a lot more running backs that I feel okay about this week than wide receivers. So when you add Javonte Williams in, Chris, you might be benching Cordell Patterson. You might be benching Elijah Mitchell. You might be benching Antonio Gibson. You might be benching a Sony Michel, who may have a full role against the Jaguars with no real backup running back to speak of. Is it just as simple? Because you can really feel, and it's fun being part of the hive mind of fantasy football when there are these moments when the anticipation has been growing and growing and growing and growing. And I can't remember another running back start. Oh, I know, Mike Boone in week 6. Oh God.
Oh,
that's when I'm going to commit. That's when I'm going to take the knife and every time I think about it. So the anticipation is massive. Do you go as far as say, again, these proven performers, guys like Elijah Mitchell, guys like Cordell Patterson, are you willing to bench them so you can get in on Javonte Williams fever?
Yeah, because I think that's isn't that a part of what fantasy football should be about? Should it just be fun? And also, I think the other highly anticipated type of running back workload is also Antonio Gibson's that you mentioned, right? Because we've been waiting for this type of moment for both of these guys, where it's just remove the other player that's been taking that part of their job, that we would just give them that workload, let them be the bell cow back for a day, and let's just see what happens. We know the talent's there. We know they're capable of doing it. Gibson's just coming off of a 30-plus touch game himself just this past weekend. And with Javonte Williams, we've seen just flashes of him being the guy throughout the entire season, whether it's him breaking tackles, carrying 3-4 guys. I mean, his missed tackle rate has probably been one of the most quoted stats throughout the entire season, on top of the fact that he's a decent pass catcher out of the backfield. So it's just, I think it can be that simple. I know the matchup's not that great. Kansas City defense, at least up front with Chris Jones playing so well, I mean, they have been playing better. So I can see a scenario where, let's say, Teddy Bridgewater gets sacked 2, 3, 4 times, doesn't throw for a ton of yards, but with Javonte Williams being at least a runner that can break off chunk runs, also catch passes out of the backfield, he gets you, let's say, 60 yards on the ground, and then let's say 3 for 30 as a pass catcher. So serviceable. And if he falls into the end zone, which is entirely possible against Kansas City defense overall, so much the better. So I just think right now, that's a matchup that you would want to try and get a piece of. And Javonte Williams, at least on Denver's side, is one of the better pieces that you would want to have anyway.
So what's happening as I'm thinking about this, Chris, is that there are a lot of running backs that look like really good starts this week that were not top 3 round picks, right? This is the year the 0 running back do the opposite, upside down drafting. I mean, we've reached peak 0 running back, right?
Yeah.
Because almost none of who are the top running backs that we actually drafted as top running backs? Jonathan Taylor, Joe Mixon. You could say maybe Clyde Edwards-Helaire, but you know, for Eckler. Yeah, thank you, Eckler. But what I'm getting at is, and again, this gets into those Javonte Williams type decisions. So for instance, and I'm just going to do these like rapid fire just so we can get a temperature check. Javonte Williams versus Alexander Madison.
I would say Alexander Madison.
Yeah. You may because it's Detroit.
Yeah.
And because it's such a good system.
Yeah.
That's where you draw the line, right?
Yep. Yeah. Comparable workloads, but he's got the better matchup.
But Javonte Williams over Elijah Mitchell?
I would actually lean Elijah Mitchell.
I know, right?
Yeah, because we've seen Elijah Mitchell like actually break off those runs in a similar sense to what we've seen Debo as well. I mean, just that San Francisco offense has been playing so efficiently. It's just, I would just rather have Elijah Mitchell at that point.
And it's in both of those cases, Madison and Mitchell, it's not. I mean, it may well be that Javonte Williams is clearly the superior talent out of those 3, but the problem is, what Minnesota is going to do, lean on the running game. San Francisco is going to lean on the running game.
Yeah.
Denver, somebody said jokingly, but it may well end up being prophetic. Are you ready for Mike Boone to get half the touches in Denver tonight?
Yeah.
I mean, for Denver in Kansas City. So that's the only hesitation with Javonte Williams, right? So what about our week 12 hero? And I love when Fantasy Karma rewards people for the people that got rewarded for playing Cordero Patterson, but also have Javonte Williams. Which way would we lean here?
I would honestly lean towards Javonte Williams at this point.
Yeah.
I think that's the tough part. It's that I know in my mind that Cordero Patterson is the right term? Like the right process play, I would say, because there's no other pass catcher in Atlanta's offense that we would think they would turn to. And then how are teams supposed to attack the Buccaneers? It's through the air.
Right.
But he's still splitting time as a runner with either, if it's not Mike Davis, it could be, insert any of the other guys they've got.
Quadri Olison.
Right. And then they've also, could this be a bounce back spot for Kyle Pitts? Could they wind up getting some production through the air? Because if I'm remembering correctly, Tampa Bay slot receiver Mike Edwards was the one that got caught up with the Antonio Brown stuff. So maybe Russell Gage shake loose for a couple of, not that we're depending on Russell Gage, but just you can see where this can go in a bunch of different ways. So, but I can still think that Patterson is a guy that should get most of the touches, but but again, I'm still, I guess my excitement for Williams makes me lean in that direction, but I get why folks still want to play CBAT.
Yeah, and the other thing is Patterson maybe not 100% healthy.
True.
You're counting on Patterson to have this incredibly durable. We've never had this before, Chris.
Yeah.
And it really is reflected in his wide receiver, running back, dual position eligibility in some software formats. Where if Tampa's going to stop the run, that's okay because then he'll be used as a receiver, and if it's a team that you can run on, then he's going to be used as a runner. So that adds a little more risk. So I agree with you there. Let's keep this Javon. And did we already decide Antonio Gibson with Madison with Mitchell?
Yes,
above the Javonte Williams line. What about What about James Conner in Chicago?
See, that's an interesting one because I would say he'd be right in that tier, right below those guys. Or if we're like grouping them in a tier, he'd be like the back end of that tier. Like that's where I'd put James Conner at, just because like similar workload. Offensive situations should also be decent. Chicago's defense from a rush perspective, they're Akeem Hicks out, Roquan Smith, I think he's doubtful at best in order to play today. So it's just like the matchup sets up well. Opportunities should be there. It's not like we're expecting Kyler Murray to run in his first game back. So I'd say he kind of fits in that same tier, the guys that we're just talking about, just more towards the back end. I'm not even really counting weather, although I've seen shots of like wintry mix and stuff like that. There should be some precipitation.
Rain.
Yeah. So, but either way, I think that's still, he's one of those guys that I would put in that group as well, just more towards the back end.
Okay. What about, and again, there's a theme here, right? Running backs that are aligning with teams that have committed to the run. What about Miles Sanders versus Javonte Williams?
Miles Sanders, that's another one of those, I understand the process against the Jets. We're not expecting a ton from Minshew, at least in the rushing part. But it's just with Javonte, we've seen that larger track record other than last week, because I think Miles Sanders, it looked like he had ripped off like a decent amount of production before he went down. But just with Javonte, like we've even seen a longer track record, at least through this season, of Javonte Williams being able to run through tackles, catch passes out of the backfield. I think he's been used similarly, at least more, even comparably out of the backfield as Miles Sanders has, like so far this season. So I lean more towards Javonte Williams, but I understand like why folks want to play Miles Sanders.
Yeah, Sanders can end up being the right play in hindsight. And again, can you see, Chris, like how many running back options there are out there?
There's a lot.
Running back option where not only are the work concentrated on one player, but the momentum of the offense also makes you want to play that player. One last one in the Javonte Williams and this one, I mean, it might be a volleyball spike where you say, no way, or it might be a volleyball spike where you say, absolutely. Javonte Williams or Leonard Fournette?
Leonard Fournette.
I mean, how can you go away from someone after they scored 4 touchdowns, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, and also being, we haven't seen a ton. It's not like Gio Bernard is creeping up in terms of pass catching or like routes or targets or anything like that. I mean, Ronald Jones has kind of snuck in for like series here, taking a touchdown, like, touchdown here or there as well. But it's just what Tampa Bay has one of the largest team totals for this weekend.
Atlanta,
against Atlanta. So you want to get in on that as well. So yeah, I would lean more towards.
Yeah, I think so. It's really easy to see. I should actually give you one more. It's really easy to see how folks could have ended up with 3 or 4 of these running backs we're talking about. If you were just you used your mid-round picks well, or you were savvy on the waiver wire, then you easily could have Elijah Mitchell and Javonte Williams and Cordero Patterson and have to make these choices. One last one. Because I find, so here's the deal. When I get this player in a start-sit question this week, Chris, my initial response is to say, no, bench him. And then just because of reputation, just because of the name and the investment, I say, really? And this isn't necessarily a Javonte Williams this is just a general temperature check. Where are you at this week on Saquon Barkley?
Oh man, that one's
so
tough.
And we can throw in some names. I'm going to throw out some names, and you can use them just to kind of demarcate where you're at with him. Okay, guys like Josh Jacobs, David Montgomery, Sony Michel. Is Barkley? These are all tough calls, or actually, if you think about it, meditate on it, you'll have clarity that no, Barkley's even below these guys.
No, I would say he's around like that's Josh Jacobs, like that in that range or something like that. Because even if it is supposed to be Mike Glennon today, I mean, matchup isn't great against Miami. So we already know that his defensive matchup isn't going to be all that great. Even without having the explosive runs, we'd at least expect him to be at least utilized somewhat in the passing game. Without having Shepard, without having Tony, so on and so forth. So I think the volume should be decent. But I think the problem is that since we haven't been seeing those long runs, the Giants' offense hasn't been great overall. I think that's why a lot of folks are down on him, which I completely understand. So I wouldn't put him anywhere close to the tier of the guys that we were talking about earlier. But he's more of like let's say, a mid-range RB2. I think that's about where I have him.
That's where he's settled at now. Accept it, folks. But no, it's true. He's not in the category. Here we are, Chris, in Fantasy Football 2021. Elijah Mitchell over Saquon Barkley with potential playoff berths in your fantasy league. It's a slam dunk that Saquon Barkley goes to your bench. I want to go over a couple of more general questions, and then we'll lightning round out some start-sit questions for the wonderful people in the chat room. One more running back, and it's a general question, and it has to do with weather. I'm going to ask you to talk about weather before we tip on out of here. But you got the New England 2-back, 3-back backfield. You got the Buffalo 2-back, 3-back backfield, but they're going to play in a winter wonderland, it sounds like, tomorrow night. And then you have these newly minted, I don't want to say lead backs, but certainly backs that will lead their backfields in touches. So are you more likely to give someone a nudge to play a New England back or a Buffalo back? And you can pick out and make exceptions. Guys like Jamal Williams, Tevin Coleman, Rex Burkhead. Do you want potentially part of a more valuable backfield or all of a less valuable backfield?
I would say all of it. Well, depending on which team we're talking about. If it's New England, I would take part of New England's backfield, whether it's Ramondre, whether it's Damian. If you're in the deepest of leagues or something like that, and you're stuck with Brandon Bolden, okay, fine. But at least that, and that's based on the fact that they've been using their running backs out of the backfield, whether it's been like a few targets here or there. I mean, there's always the chance that they can wind up actually using them once they get into the red zone as well. So it's just, I think that backfield, lends itself to being at least a little bit more fantasy friendly. But with the Bills, even with Josh Allen being at least a bit more productive this past weekend on Thanksgiving, while using some of those running backs out of the backfield, we saw Brady get involved, like so on and so forth. Against New England, actually, Josh Allen has been more of a scrambler, and also he's been more apt to at least take it in himself once they get into the red zone. That's just a historical thing, like over the past few years. Other than that Week 16 game they had like last season, but I think at that point, I think Jarrett Stidham played like half the game like last year. So I'm looking more at just the core pieces for Buffalo's offense. Just like if it's Josh Allen, it's Stephon Diggs, Dawson Knox, like in the red zone, and also Cole Beasley. I mean, that's pretty much all I'm looking at from Buffalo, with just the matchup being tough tough in and of itself. The winds, I think, are going to be 20 plus mile per hour. So it's just, I'm looking at just those core pieces for Buffalo's offense. But with the Patriots, them involving their backs as much as they have so far, I could see some folks like playing Harris, Ramondre, Bolden in a deep league, that sort of thing.
Just from a human being standpoint, Chris, I would not want to have to tackle Ramondre Stevenson and Damian Harris in those conditions, right? And this is a Buffalo defense that we just saw shy away and turn into roadkill from Jonathan Taylor 2 weeks ago in Buffalo. So I definitely like that you put the emphasis on the New England backs. I'm much more likely to nudge you to play one of those New England backs if you're on the fence with the full workload. I love that Zari. What's up, Zari, man? Says, I'm starting Rec Burst at a running back too, and I'm fired up for it. Hey, I mean, at least he can get some. And maybe it's Royce Freeman say, okay, a couple of wide receivers temperature check. Are you more likely to tell people to start or sit Elijah Moore today?
Start. They have to continue to use him. Like, I know the matchup isn't the greatest. I mean, the Eagles have been playing like fairly good defense. I mean, Darius Slay, I mean, my goodness. I mean, he's been playing like some of his best football.
Yeah.
But I think in order for, and as bad as Zach Wilson has been, I think from a O-line, D-line type of like perspective, I can see the Eagles getting after Zach Wilson like all day. But from an opportunity standpoint, at this point in the season, if the Jets are trying to figure out what they have in Elijah Moore, I mean, what are we even doing here? I mean, what is Saleh and the rest of that offensive staff like really doing? So no, I would lean folks more towards playing Elijah Moore. I mean, this is more of a hold your nose, let's see what happens afterwards. But from an opportunity standpoint, it should be there for more, like from here on to the rest of the season, because he's essentially what they have to evaluate before they close out their season.
It only takes one play. He's that good. Yeah. What about DK Metcalf at home this week against San Francisco?
From a historical standpoint, hasn't DK Metcalf played well when they played? And I know that's one of those narratives that I know it really doesn't hold much water, like outside of just a few.
Let me interject though, because you do have familiarity with these teams. Like San Francisco always beat the Rams. I mean, you have familiarity with these NFC West teams, and I think that Metcalf had 10 for 161 and 2 against them last year. I think it was the game in Seattle also.
Yeah, so it's just like one of those things where if you want to find some hope for Russ rekindling his connection with DK, like after everything that's been said and done like on the field over the past couple of weeks, I think that'd be one of the things where it's like Metcalf has like historically played well against the 49ers. They've at least talked a good game of wanting to get him more involved in the offense, what Russ calling him one of the best players in the world, something like that. So I get it. I get it. I know Tyler Lockett is the only one that most folks want to trust. Russ has not looked great, whether it be the finger, whether it be whatever the case may be. Him wanting to leave, that might be a Thursday night discussion. But I think for this matchup, I can see folks still wanting to play DK Metcalf just for if it doesn't happen here, then I mean, all bets are off at that point.
Exactly. There is a fear of missing out with Metcalf this week, even though he hasn't been doing anything coming into this week. Yeah, that's how I would put it. And if somebody did perfectly reasonable question would be Metcalf or more, I'd probably go with Metcalf. In general, folks, sometimes when I'm making these tough calls on wide receivers or tight ends, here's an easy tiebreaker: the quarterback. Who do you want? Because I like to say during draft season too, you're not just taking the receiver, you're taking the combination. And really, if you want to talk about it, the whole ecosystem of the offense, but really the quarterback to wide receiver or tight end connection. So do you want to start Zach Wilson or do you want to start Russell Wilson? Which Wilson do you want to go down with this week? And I love, by the way, that you say Thursday night discussion. Like, it's like you've been doing this show with us for years from the beginning. It's wonderful. Okay.
I've been listening long enough to know that that's the time where you let your hair down and let's just talk it out. Let's get philosophical for an evening.
Yeah. We don't have to come up with actionable advice, even though those discussions often lay the groundwork for how we end up with our outcomes in these questions. Like, let's go ahead and knock some of these out for some folks out there. I'm just picking some at random because I tried to answer for those of you that were here early. I tried to answer as many as I could in the chat room. Vinny Briganti asks, Brandon Ayuk, no Deebo Samuel, or Deontay Johnson in the standard?
I would say it's still Deontay Johnson. I mean, I get the fact that Ayuk should probably have like a larger target share, but we're also talking about an offense with the Steelers that's been more predicated on the pass, even though their passer hasn't been all that great for the past few weeks. But if you get up for he gets up for the right games, right? Like with the Chargers game a few weeks ago, he gets up and has like one of his better games.
Prime time,
yeah. And like in this game against Baltimore, if Baltimore's offense can start to get things going and pulls Ben into one of his better games, Deontay Johnson immediately comes with him. At the very least, I mean, if they wind up getting blown out, Ben's still passing with 6 minutes left in the game. So no, I think Deontay Johnson has been his number one. I know that Baltimore, since they play more man coverage, that is typically lean more towards like Chase Claypool being involved, just because Ben can get like some of those deep shots to him. But I think Deontay Johnson, I would still start him over Brandon Ayuk.
Yeah, I would tend to go with Deontay, although I wouldn't be surprised. The question is really how much of a fight does Seattle put up? If Russell Wilson plays really well, it's almost like give me an over-under on Russell Wilson's passing yards today. And if it was like over 250, I would say you want to play Ayuk. But we're asking something to change that hasn't changed. Scott Friedman, and this is one that is very close to your heart. Carson Wentz, it's Houston. So would we be shocked if he only throws the ball 18 or 20 times? Or Joe Burrow? By design, they don't want him to throw the ball more than 25 or 28 times against the Chargers. And you would also think, a lot of Joe Mixon today.
Yeah, and I think that's where, if we're thinking about the assumption of rational coaching, I mean, how have teams tried to attack like the Chargers, and it's been through the run. But I do think that on the flip side, though, with Cincinnati's defense, like while they've been playing like fairly well, I mean, the Chargers offense, if they get up for this game, it could be one where Joe Burrow gets pulled into a shootout. Where with Houston and Indianapolis, what are the chances that Houston wakes up to a game where they get pulled into a shootout where Carson Wentz is required to pass, almost like what they had to do last week against the Bucs? Right. I see less of a chance of that happening. So I lean more towards Joe Burrow, at least in the sense that I think in both cases, I mean, Joe Mixon has been catching passes out of the backfield. We can see a scenario where Joe Burrow at least tosses one to Joe Mixon on top of mixing in, let's say, a shot to Higgins, shot to Chase, so on and so forth. So I lean more towards Burrow, but I understand the thought process of trying to at least capture all of the touchdowns. But have we really thought about the Colts as being this offensive juggernaut in the same way we think about the Bucs, where they're scoring 30 plus points? So we need to capture all those touchdowns. So I lean more towards Burrow in that sense.
I love that. I mean, I'm just picturing you with your engineering precise analysis, Chris, drawing out the whiteboard and saying the choice between Burrow and Wentz comes down really to the choice between Herbert and Tyrod Taylor. You know, I mean, that's actually the choice here. Who's more likely to make the other quarterback and the other offense have to pass? We haven't talked about this name yet, and this is another name that we could do to general temperature check after we give the answer here for Felipe Cardenas. Pat Freiermuth, who appears after suffering a concussion last week, is going to play against Baltimore, who is somewhat generous to tight ends, or the island of Foster Moreau.
I like that. And man, that's so close. I lean more towards Freiermuth just in the way that he's been used more towards the red zone, because let's assume that both teams, like the Steelers and the Raiders, wind up getting into the red zone. how do you think that Derek Carr is going to wind up, or how do you think the Raiders are actually going to utilize their offense or like run their offense
Right.
in the red zone? They could try and pound it in through Josh Jacobs. They could try to like having one of those passes to Hunter Renfrow. Heck, they've even talked about using Marcus Mariota more once they get into the red zone. Whereas with the Steelers, it's really been, I mean, Najee Harris, maybe a couple of shots like to Deontay Harris, but like Freiermuth has been one of their leaders in terms of target share once they get into the red zone. So at least that, and that's where we rely on most of our points to come from the tight end position. So I think I give the edge to Freiermuth, but I can totally understand just from the hype I've heard about Foster Moreau throughout the entire week since Waller has been like essentially cascaded down from like being questionable, doubtful, out. I lean more towards Freiermuth.
And I think you're right to focus on the touchdowns. I'm not going to talk anybody out of playing Foster Moreau this week. If you're saying, I want to play Moreau over Freiermuth, am I crazy? You know, you're not crazy. 6 for 16, a touchdown on the first one. He's just a good player. He's just one of those players. One of the best things, especially in your dynasty leagues, when you see these players get limited opportunities, but pop, you know that eventually they're going to get that chance, and it can help inform your waiver wire pickups. And, you know, in this case, I think it's been a good one for Moreau. So as we're counting down the time here, I do want to focus down more on this tight end question in general, because putting together the tight end rankings this week, it was not easy. You know, there's the clear top 4. And by the way, let this guide us to the blue chip value of taking those early tight ends. Because, Chris, when we look at the tight ends that we know for sure we're playing this week, who are they? Kelsey, Kittle, Andrews, right? I mean, these
Gronkowski.
are Gronkowski, and that's beautiful. And that's beautiful, by the way. So those are the guys, right? And I actually had someone ask me about Gronkowski versus Andrews. Like, oh, man. You know, it's not easy. It's a good problem to have. But so we've established Freiermuth, at least in your opinion. And look, these are all like, they're 52-48, 53-47 kind of calls. So even though we're making a definitive call, it doesn't mean that we don't see the other side of it. So there's Freiermuth and there's Foster Moreau. Let's start putting in some other. If we wish we had the whiteboard, we could just put them in there, right?
Yeah.
So let's start putting in some of the other tough calls at tight end this week on that axis. Okay. Dawson Knox.
Below all of the
below both.
I would say below both of those guys. So I would say just right outside, like right below Moreau. And
that's a nice ring to it, below Moreau.
Yeah.
Mike Gesicki.
Right in between those guys. So like Moreau, Gesicki, because we're seeing like a bit more passing game usage, and then maybe Knox like right underneath. There.
Fireman's still at the top because of that touchdown equity. Yeah. Kyle Pitts. Exactly. That's been. Let's just talk about having Kyle Pitts on your fantasy team for the year 2021. Oh, that's basically been.
It was great to start.
For 2 weeks.
Yeah, for 2 weeks. And then, of course,
people were actually congratulating me. It was like, don't bloom. Okay. People were like, great call, Kyle Pitts. See, I'm glad it's finally coming through. Like,
And I mean, to keep all things in context, I mean, props to Calvin Ridley for stepping away when he felt that he needed to.
Yeah,
but this is why. I mean, and we can easily contextualize why Kyle Pitts is having the season that he's having, because teams are just like, well, beat us with Olamide Zaccheaus and Russell Gage, because we're going to take away Kyle Pitts. It's that simple. So no, I can understand that, and I can understand like why folks would want to gravitate towards Pitts, because at the tight end position, who else you got outside of the guys that we've named? There's essentially like 10 guys like every week. And past that, you're just throwing darts at Gerald Everett and Hunter Henry and Logan Thomas. I mean, there's a few other guys. I think Logan Thomas actually probably fits into the range of guys that we're just talking about. But outside of those guys, they're just guys that we know, like we can recognize their names. We know that they're going to get a few targets, but that's about it. There's other guys, we at least know that they're going to have reliable targets week in and week out, like on their respective offenses, which makes it easier for us to start them. But at the same time, like with Kyle Pitts, we know we should get opportunity, especially in this matchup today.
Right.
But what's the production going to look like? And with his current trend, it's tough to trust. So I can understand folks want to look at any of the other options we've discussed so far. Like, heck, I'd probably look at starting Foster Moreau over Kyle Pitts this week.
Yeah. Or you mentioned Gerald Everett's another one, because he's got some and he's at home. Yeah. And the problem is, and really, I think the part that was difficult to forecast for Pitts is that, and like you said, there's been some things that have conspired against him, like Calvin Ridley sitting out a big part of the season. but also that Matt Ryan was not going to be willing to force the ball in. That Matt Ryan, somebody mentioned that I saw some analysis that said that Kyle Pitts' rookie year actually looks a lot like Julio Jones' rookie year.
That's fair. Yeah.
And, I mean, statistically and so on. And also, you've seen over the years that Matt Ryan was willing to throw the ball to Julio Jones in tight coverage. He was willing to allow Julio Jones' immense talent to manifest on the field until a fantasy matchup. He's not willing to do that with Pitts yet. And the layer beneath that is that teams are giving Pitts that kind of treatment where that's how Ryan has to get the ball to him if he's going to. So it's where we are. Okay, a couple more tight ends to slot into this tight end thermometer here. TJ Hawkinson.
I would say he goes in that same range as like slightly above like the Knox Freiermuth, just because the opportunity that should present itself to him. I mean, what else are we going to rely on from Detroit's offense?
Josh Reynolds.
That's about it. I mean, Jamal Williams should see a decent amount of dump offs, but other than that, there's nobody else in that target tree we should rely on, or that Jared Goff should rely on. Right. So no, I think TJ Hawkinson should have a pretty good game today.
So maybe Hawkinson at the top of this whole tier after the top four, and I think that's fair because it's an indoor game, and because it's Jared Goff. So you have a very high ceiling. I mean, the only other player in this tier that has as high a ceiling as Hawkinson is actually Pitts, but Pitts also has a very low floor.
Right.
Last one. How are Dallas Goedert and Gardner Minshew going to get along, assuming Minshew is the starter?
I think they should get along great. I mean, Dallas Goedert is good in his own right. So I have no issues. Yeah, I do think that we'll be talking about him like over the next like couple of years in that same range as not necessarily the Andrews, Kittle, Kelsey, but like where we talk about like TJ Hawkinson, probably that would be like TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert. We're probably talking about like, and maybe even Logan Thomas if he continues to come along. Yeah. But I do think that like for today's game, I mean, Dallas Goedert, I really like also Devonta Smith. I mean, the core passing pieces to Philadelphia's game should be the guys that we rely on. And Smith, Goddard, I mean, those guys that I think like Gardner Minshew is going to love to be passing to against this Jets secondary.
Philly against the Jets, and you wonder if it's going to be a situation like we saw with Mike White, where with a different quarterback, this is a different offense, and a lot of things work that have not been working. It always works for us to get together with you all on Sunday mornings, again, over 350, and it's week 13, and I know a lot of our numbers behind the scenes show, and it makes sense, right? Engagement with fantasy football drops off. I mean, teams out of the playoffs, or we got the holiday season, a lot of different things going on. Y'all are just the best audience, the best people that we could have to serve. I will say, when we continue to see that YouTube channel subscription number grow, we're almost up to 15,000. Have to do something special for that. So comment, subscribe. That helps us. It helps us get the channel via YouTube in front of other people who might enjoy it and use it, and otherwise into the Football Guys community, which we love to be part of. There's no better community out there. So thank you, folks, as always. Good luck this week.
Yes.
Enjoy the games. And then what's nice this week, Chris, is that we have quite possibly the most compelling game, probably the worst game. A lot of people are going to go into Monday night needing X number of points and not getting it. Unless it's the defenses. Maybe the New England defense is going to come through for you. But it's going to be an unbelievably compelling game tomorrow night. Buffalo and New England. Cannot wait. So we get a good football dessert after a fantasy football feast that we always enjoy with you all every week, because you're so very